I couldn't trust what I saw. There was a man standing at the end of my hallway, and when I blinked, he was gone. That was 3 weeks ago. I still don't know if he was ever really there, but I know what I found afterward, and that's the part that won't leave me alone. I moved into the house on Renfield Street in early October. A 2-story rental, older neighborhood, quiet street, big backyard that backed up against a tree line. It was exactly the kind of place I'd been looking for. Affordable. Private. Mine. The landlord was a quiet older man who handed me the keys without much conversation. I didn't think anything of that. Some landlords are just like that. The first week was fine. More than fine, actually. I felt settled almost immediately, which was unusual for me. I'm the kind of person who takes months to stop feeling like a guest in my own space. But something about that house felt like it already knew me. The walls, the light, the particular silence of it in the evenings. I told myself that was a good sign. I remember telling my sister on the phone that I finally felt like I'd found somewhere real. I should have paid more attention to that feeling, to why it felt that way. The first thing I noticed, and I truly dismissed it at the time, was the smell. Not a bad smell, exactly. More like someone had been in a room right before you walked in. That warm, faint human presence that a space holds for just a few minutes after a person leaves. I noticed it in the upstairs bathroom most consistently. I'd step in after a shower, and the air felt slightly used, slightly occupied. Like the room hadn't had quite enough time to forget someone. I figured it was the old pipes. Old houses breathe differently. They hold heat in strange places. That's what I told myself. The second week, I started waking up at 3 a.m. Not dramatically. Not gasping from a nightmare. I'd simply open my eyes and lie there in the dark, completely alert, like something had called me out of sleep but hadn't announced what it was yet. I'd stare at the ceiling and listen. The house would creak. The trees outside would shift. And then, after 10 minutes or so, I'd drift back under and feel completely foolish about it come morning. It became a pattern. Every night, around the same time, that same sudden alertness, eyes open, ears open, listening for something I couldn't name, until the morning I walked into the kitchen and found one of my cabinet doors open. Just one. The one above the refrigerator that I almost never use. It was hanging wide open, fully extended, like someone had swung it out and just walked away. I stood there in my socks on the cold tile and looked at it for a long moment. I had no memory of opening it. I'd barely used the kitchen the night before, just reheated some soup, ate it on the couch, went to bed. I had no reason to go near that cabinet. I closed it, made my coffee, told myself I must have bumped it without noticing, maybe when I was reaching for something nearby. That made sense, right? Except the cabinet is almost 6 feet off the ground, and I'm 5'7". I would have had to reach for it intentionally. I didn't let myself think about that part. But that night I woke up at 3 a.m. again, and this time there was a sound. Not a creak or the house settling into itself. A sound like weight shifting. Like slow, deliberate pressure moving across a floor. It was coming from downstairs, toward the back of the house, near the kitchen. I lay completely still. I barely breathed. My heart was going fast, and I was very aware of how quiet the rest of the house was around that one sound. It came again. One slow movement. Then absolute silence. I told myself it was a cat. Then I remembered I don't have a cat. I didn't go downstairs. I pulled the blanket up to my chin like a child, and I waited for morning. And when morning came, everything was exactly where I'd left it. Nothing knocked over, nothing missing, nothing disturbed. The cabinet above the refrigerator was closed. I went to work. I came home. I told myself it was stress, a new place, unfamiliar sounds, an overactive imagination working overtime in the quiet hours. Completely normal. Then I found the second thing. I have a small desk in the corner of my bedroom. I keep a notepad there, a lamp, a few books stacked on the corner. Nothing important, just the kind of quiet little arrangement you build up without thinking about it. But when I sat down at that desk on a Thursday evening, I noticed one of the books had been moved. Not dramatically, it hadn't fallen or been knocked off the stack. It had been rotated, turned 90 degrees so that the spine was facing away from me instead of toward me, the way I always keep my books, the way I specifically like my books because I want to be able to read the titles. I sat there and just looked at it. I picked it up and turned it back. And then I sat very still and thought carefully about the last time I remembered touching that desk. That morning, before work, I was certain the book had been facing me. Almost completely certain. And that word almost became the most frightening word in my life over the days that followed, because that's what this whole situation was doing to me. It wasn't giving me anything definitive. It was just quietly, persistently eroding my certainty, trimming away the edges of what I knew until I couldn't trust what I saw, couldn't trust what I remembered, couldn't trust my own mind. Was the cabinet open, or had it always been open and I'd simply never noticed? Was the book turned, or had I turned it myself in some distracted, half-awake moment? Had there really been a sound downstairs, or had I been half asleep and dreaming it? I started keeping a log, just a notes app on my phone, dated entries, documenting every small thing. The cabinet on Monday, the sound on Tuesday, the book on Thursday. Writing it down made me feel more rational about it, like I was being careful and methodical and not just losing my mind in a new house. But reading back through those entries a week later, I felt something I didn't expect. Not relief, not clarity. Reading them back, all in a row, what I felt was dread. Because individually, each thing was dismissible. Taken together, they formed something. A shape. A pattern of access. Someone was moving through my space at will, not randomly, carefully, touching things and putting them back, listening and then going quiet, learning the landscape of my life from the inside. I started doing something else. Too. Something I'm not entirely proud of. I started documenting. Every morning before I left the house, I walked through each room and took photos on my phone, the kitchen, the bathroom, the desk. I told myself it was practical. I told myself I just needed to confirm that everything was fine, that nothing was changing while I was gone, and then I could stop worrying and move on. That Friday, one of the photos showed something I didn't expect. Not something that would alarm a stranger looking at it. Not something I could point to and say, "Look, obviously, clearly something is wrong." In the photo I took of the bathroom that Friday morning, my hand towel was folded neatly over the towel bar, lengthwise, evenly, with the decorative edge facing out, precise, habitual, the way I've hung towels my entire adult life. In the photo I'd taken the Thursday evening before, that same towel was hanging loosely, one end lower than the other, slightly bunched, like someone had grabbed it, used it quickly, and tossed it back without paying attention to how it landed. I lived alone. I had not touched that towel between Thursday evening and Friday morning. I went to bed. I got up. I walked straight downstairs. I stood in the bathroom holding my phone and I felt something move through me. Not panic. Not yet. Something colder. And slower than panic. The quiet, terrible arrival of a truth that your mind has been refusing to accept because accepting it. Thought about how easily we trust our own environment. How quickly we accept the world we see as the whole of the world that exists. I had walked past evidence every single day and my brain had quietly, helpfully explained it away each time because the alternative was too much to hold. I called the police. I went through everything, the cabinet, the book, the towel, the sounds at night. The officer who came was patient and professional, and clearly not fully convinced that anything criminal had actually taken place. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, no camera footage. Just things slightly out of place, and a tenant who was admittedly stressed from a recent move. He filed a report and told me to call back if anything escalated. I asked what escalated would look like. He said I'd know it when I saw it. He said it gently, like that was meant to reassure me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed with every single light on and the bedroom door wedged shut with a chair, and I stared at the wall and listened to the house. I replayed every small, strange thing from the past 2 weeks, and I tried to arrange it all into something that made sense. Every arrangement I came up with ended in the same place. And I kept rejecting that conclusion, kept pushing it away, because accepting it was too frightening to do alone in the dark at 3:17 a.m. I heard the footsteps in the hallway, not downstairs, right outside my door. 1 step, 2 steps, a pause. That stretched out so long I started to believe I'd imagined it. And then, in the silence, I heard breathing, slow, even, controlled, just beyond the door, just on the other side of that thin piece of wood, close enough that I could hear the rhythm of it over the hammering of my own heart. Patient breathing, unhurried. I sat on the bed with my hands shaking and my vision narrowing, and I did not make a single sound. I stared at the chair wedged under the door handle and told myself it would hold. I counted seconds. I prayed. The breathing continued for what felt like several minutes, and then it stopped. And the footsteps moved back down the hallway. Slow and deliberate, not running, not startled, just leaving. Like someone going back to where they always went. I didn't move until sunrise. When I finally walked out into the hallway, I looked at the floor and I found a smear on the hardwood just outside my door. Dark, narrow, the shape of a shoe sole. Someone had been standing there, pressing their weight slightly forward, leaning toward the door, close enough to listen through it. I photographed it. I called the detective whose card I'd been given. He came within the hour, and when he crouched down and examined that mark, something shifted in his face. He stopped being polite and started being serious. He stood up and looked at me, and then he looked at the door to the basement. The basement door was in the kitchen. I'd looked at it when I moved in, decided it was just storage. Gone down once to check the water heater, and basically pretended it didn't exist after that. I walked past it every single morning. What I had never looked at, what I had never had. Any reason to examine? Was the lock? Someone had reversed it? Taken the mechanism apart and put it back facing the other way, so that it could only be locked from the inside? From the basement side. You couldn't lock that door from the kitchen. You could only hold it shut from below. The detective pointed to it without saying anything for a moment. Then he pushed the door open and we both stood at the top of the stairs and looked down into the dark dot at the bottom of the stairs, behind the water heater. In the far corner where the overhead light didn't reach, someone had made a home. A sleeping bag, worn and flattened from long use, several water bottles, a careful stack of food wrappers, a phone charger coiled neatly on the floor, a battery-powered lantern with the batteries set beside it to conserve them, and 3 paperbacks, their spines broken from repeated reading, stacked in a small tower against the wall. Someone had been down there for a long time, long enough to care about the organization of their things, long enough to have preferences. And on the wall above the sleeping bag, taped with small pieces of masking tape, hung a single piece of paper. Handwritten, neat, unhurried letters. "Can hear you sleeping?" The detective stepped in front of me before I could move toward the stairs. He did it quietly, without explanation, and I understood. Crime scene. I was not supposed to go down there. I was not supposed to stand in that corner and try to understand it from the inside. I went outside and sat on the front step. More officers. Came lights. Tape, neighbors pulling their cars over to stare. I sat through all of it from a distance that felt completely disconnected from reality, like I was watching something happen to someone else. They found other things. I learned about them slowly, through the detective, in careful measured pieces. Over the following days, evidence of long habitation, hair, fibers, faint marks on the interior wall that might have been a kind of calendar, scratches tracking days or weeks or possibly months. No one was certain how long. No one was willing to give me a specific number, and I stopped pushing because I could tell that whatever number it was, they didn't want me to have it yet. The landlord, when questioned, said he was genuinely shocked. He'd owned that house for years, rented it to 4 or 5 different tenants. The last ones had left suddenly, he said, without much explanation. He hadn't thought much about it at the time. People leave. Leases end. He'd cleaned the place himself and listed it again. I wondered if he'd ever gone into the basement. I wondered if whoever had been down there had been quiet enough, careful enough, to stay invisible even during a walk-through. I thought about how easy it would be to press yourself into a dark corner behind a water heater while someone walked through and saw nothing unusual. How much patience that would take. How practiced. And there was the hole, small and neat, the detective told me, drilled cleanly through the basement ceiling directly below the floor vent in my bedroom. The floor vent I walked over every single morning. The vent I sometimes stood above in the early hours because warm air came up through it, and the bedroom floor was cold in October. Someone had been below me, in the dark looking up through that vent, every night. I don't live on Renfield Street anymore. I was out of the house within hours, and I have not been back. I've been staying with my sister for 3 weeks now, sleeping in her locked guest room, waking up at 3 a.m. every night, like my body still hasn't accepted that it's safe to rest. I leave the light on. She doesn't say anything about it. They haven't found him. There are leads being followed, the detective tells me. Evidence being processed. They're working on it. I believe him completely. It doesn't help me sleep. What I can't stop thinking about isn't the fear of it, though the fear is real and it's constant. What I can't stop thinking about is the intimacy of it. Someone knew my schedule. Someone knew what time I left and what time I came back. Someone knew how I folded my towels in which cabinet I never used, and what the rhythm of my footsteps sounded like crossing the bedroom floor at night. Someone lay 12 feet below me in the dark and learned me completely. Without my knowledge, without my consent, with a patience and a precision that I cannot fully comprehend. They knew me better than some people, who have known me for years, and I keep going back to that first night. Moving day. Boxers stacked everywhere, the couch not yet unpacked, sitting on the bare floor of the empty living room eating takeout and calling my sister. I told her the house felt right, I told her it felt like being somewhere I already belonged. Remember, right before I fell asleep that first night, thinking that the silence of the place felt warm, not empty, not the hollow quiet of a place that doesn't know you yet. Something fuller than that. Something that felt, somehow, like presence. I wasn't wrong about that. The house wasn't empty. It had never been empty. It was full of someone else's careful attention. Weeks or months of someone learning every sound and habit and detail of whatever life had existed in those rooms before mine. When I felt that immediate, inexplicable sense of being known and settled. And at home. I wasn't imagining it. I just had no idea who was doing the knowing. And the part that wakes me up at 3 a.m. even now. Even here in my sister's locked guest room far from Renfield Street, is that I still don't know how long it went on before I moved in. I don't know how many people lived in that house before me. I don't know how many of them lay in that bedroom on an October night and thought the silence felt warm, thought the place felt like it already knew them. I don't know how many of them ever figured out why,